What happens when a gate agent's petty power trip targets the wrong teenager? In a crowded airport, a black teen's dream trip is shattered when her ticket is ripped to shreds. The agent, drunk on authority, smirks, thinking she's won. But she has no idea who she just crossed. She doesn't know the girl's father, a man who doesn't just fly on planes, he buys them. This isn't just a story of instant karma. It's a real-life drama, where one woman's prejudice ignites a firestorm that will burn her entire world to the ground. Stay tuned. The air in the terminal of Chicago O'Hare International Airport hummed with the familiar symphony of travel. The distant roar of jet engines, the rhythmic click-clack of rolling suitcases, and the murmur of 1,000 conversations blending into a single anonymous chorus. For 17-year-old Ayanna Caldwell, this was the soundtrack of adventure. An aspiring photojournalist, she saw the world through a lens of vibrant curiosity. And today, that lens was focused on the promise of London. A summer program at the prestigious Central St. Martin's was waiting for her, a dream she had nurtured with every click of her camera. Ayanna clutched her passport and boarding pass, the crisp paper a tangible representation of her excitement. She was a striking girl, with intelligent, almond-shaped eyes that missed nothing. Her hair was styled in intricate box braids that cascaded over her shoulders, each one a testament to her patience and her pride in her heritage. Dressed in a stylish yet comfortable ensemble of a vintage band t-shirt, ripped jeans and a pair of well-worn Doc Martens, she exuded an aura of cool confidence. Around her neck hung her prized possession, a vintage Leica M6, a gift from her father. It was more than just a camera. It was an extension of her eye, her voice, her soul. Her father, Robert Caldwell, was a man who commanded respect without ever raising his voice. A self-made billionaire, he had built a tech empire from the ground up, his name synonymous with innovation and integrity. Despite his immense wealth and influence, he had raised Ayanna to be grounded to value hard work and to treat everyone with dignity. He was her hero, her mentor, her biggest fan. He was also, as of this morning, the new majority shareholder of Transatlantic Air, the very airline Ayanna was about to fly. It was a detail he had yet to share with his daughter, wanting to surprise her with the news when she landed in London. "Got everything, sweetie?" His voice, a deep and reassuring baritone, rumbled beside her. Ayanna smiled up at him, her eyes sparkling. "Everything, Dad." Passport, ticket, camera, and a slightly terrified but incredibly excited heart. He chuckled, his hand gently squeezing her shoulder. "That's my girl. You're going to take London by storm. Just remember to call me when you land. And don't forget to eat something other than fish and chips. I'll try." She laughed, but no promises. They shared a warm embrace, a silent exchange of love and pride. Then, with a final wave, Ayanna turned and headed towards the security checkpoint, her heart soaring with anticipation. The line at gate C27 was a chaotic jumble of weary travelers' families with restless children and business professionals glued to their phones. Ayanna found a seat near the window, her gaze drifting to the massive Boeing 787 Dreamliner being prepped for its transatlantic journey. She pulled out her sketchbook and began to draw, her pencil dancing across the page as she captured the organized chaos of the ground crew. As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, a sense of unease began to creep into the air. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with a severe haircut and a name tag that read Brenda, seemed to be radiating an aura of discontent. Her voice, sharp and laced with impatience, cut through the din. "Group A, and only Group A, may now board." Have your passports and boarding passes ready. If you are not in Group A, do not approach the desk. I will not repeat myself. Ayana, holding a Group B ticket, watched as the first wave of passengers shuffled forward. Brenda's interactions were a masterclass in passive aggression. A sigh here, an eye roll there, a curt snap at anyone who fumbled with their documents. Ayana had seen people like Brenda before. Individuals who, given a sliver of authority, wielded it like a weapon. A young couple, clearly on their honeymoon, approached the desk, their faces beaming with excitement. "Excuse me, ma'am," the husband began. "We're in Group C, but we were hoping—" Brenda cut him off, her voice dripping with disdain. "Did you hear the announcement, Group A? Does your ticket say Group A no? Then please step aside." The couple, taken aback by her hostility, retreated, their smiles vanishing. Ayana felt a pang of sympathy for them. A little kindness cost nothing, yet Brenda seemed to have a deficit of it. Finally, the call for Group B came. Ayana gathered her things and joined the line, her excitement momentarily dampened by the gate agent's sour demeanor. As she neared the desk, she couldn't help but overhear the exchange between Brenda and the man in front of her, an elderly gentleman who was struggling to hear. "Sir, I need to see your passport." Brenda's voice was unnecessarily loud, her tone condescending. "I'm sorry, dear," the man said, cupping his ear. "My hearing isn't what it used to be." "Your passport," she repeated, her voice now a full-blown shout. The man flustered, fumbled in his bag, his hands trembling slightly. Brenda's impatience was palpable. She snatched the passport from his hand, scanned it with a flick of her wrist, and thrust it back at him. "You're holding up the line. Move along." Ayana's jaw tightened. The man's humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow. She promised herself she would not let this woman's negativity affect her. This was her dream trip, and no one was going to ruin it. When it was her turn, Ayana approached the desk with a polite smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. Brenda's eyes, cold and calculating, swept over Ayana, taking in her braids, her ripped jeans, her vintage camera. A flicker of something ugly, a mixture of contempt and prejudice, crossed her face. It was a look Ayana had seen before, a look that judged her on the color of her skin, the style of her hair, the clothes she wore. "Boarding pass and passport," Brenda demanded, her voice flat and devoid of any courtesy. Ayana handed them over, her smile faltering slightly. Brenda scrutinized the documents, her lips curling into a sneer. "This is a first-class ticket," she said, her tone accusatory, as if Ayana had stolen it. "Yes, it is," Ayana replied, her voice still calm, but with an edge of defiance. "My father bought it for me." Brenda's smirk widened. "Your father, right. And I suppose he's the King of England." The people in line behind Ayana began to murmur their attention, drawn to the escalating tension. Ayana's cheeks flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "I don't see what my father's profession has to do with this," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Brenda leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "The problem, little girl, is that people like you don't belong in first class. This ticket is clearly fraudulent. I'm going to have to confiscate it." And with that, Brenda took Ayana's boarding pass, and with a theatrical flourish ripped it in two. The sound of tearing paper, though small, echoed through the suddenly silent gate area like a gunshot. Ayana stared at the two pieces of her dream, lying on the counter like a casualty of a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. The crowd gasped, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. For a moment, Ayana was frozen, the injustice of it all washing over her in a tidal wave of fury. But then a steely resolve settled in her heart. This was not just about a ripped ticket. This was about a woman who had judged her, humiliated her, and tried to strip her of her dignity. And Ayana Caldwell was not about to let her get away with it. She looked Brenda dead in the eye, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. "You have no idea what you've just done." The silence at gate C-27 was a thick, suffocating blanket. Every eye was on the two figures at the center of the drama. The young black girl, her face a mask of controlled fury, and the gate agent, her smirk, a defiant flag of her perceived victory. The ripped pieces of the boarding pass lay on the counter between them, a symbol of the chasm that had opened up between them. Brenda, emboldened by the silence, doubled down on her power trip. "I know exactly what I've done," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "I've prevented a freeloader from stealing a seat she didn't pay for. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a plane to board. I suggest you leave before I call security." Ayana didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice low and steady, yet carrying a weight that made even the people at the back of the line lean in to listen. "You have made a very serious mistake, and you will be held accountable for it." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. This was no longer just a case of a rude employee. It was a public spectacle, a clash of wills that was far more compelling than any in-flight movie. A few people discreetly pulled out their phones, their screens illuminating the growing tension. Brenda's face, already flushed with anger, turned a shade darker. "Accountable to whom to you? Don't make me laugh. You're just a little girl who thinks she can play dress-up and waltz into first class. Now get out of my line." "I am a paying passenger," Ayana said, her voice rising slightly. "And you have just destroyed my property. You have also publicly humiliated me based on nothing more than your own prejudice, and for that there will be consequences." The word prejudice hung in the air, a loaded accusation that made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. They had all witnessed Brenda's behavior, her condescending tone, her dismissive attitude. They had seen the way she had looked at Ayana, the judgment in her eyes. And now, they were all complicit in their silence. One woman, a business executive in a sharp pantsuit, finally spoke up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm, "but the girl is right. Your behavior has been completely unprofessional. I saw the whole thing." Another man, a tourist in a Hawaiian shirt, chimed in. "Yeah, that was way out of line. You can't just rip up someone's ticket like that." Brenda, suddenly finding herself on the defensive, rounded on them. "This is an official matter," she snapped, "and it does not concern you. Please mind your own business." But the tide of public opinion had turned. The crowd was no longer a silent audience. They were a chorus of dissent, and their voices were getting louder. "This is our business," a young man with a backpack said, his phone held up, recording everything. "We're all customers of this airline, and we don't appreciate seeing one of our own being treated like this." The word airline seemed to trigger something in Ayana's memory. A fragment of a conversation with her father, a news report she had half listened to, a headline she had glanced at. It was all coming together now, a puzzle clicking into place. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. A quick search, a few taps, and there it was, in bold black and white. Robert Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries, acquires a majority stake in Transatlantic Air. A slow smile spread across Ayana's face, a smile that was equal parts amusement and triumph. It was a smile that said, "Checkmate." She looked up at Brenda, who was still trying to quell the growing rebellion in the line. "Brenda," she said, her voice suddenly calm, almost conversational. "I think you should call your supervisor. In fact, I think you should call the CEO of this airline." Brenda scoffed. "And why would I do that?" Ayana's smile widened. "Because my father is going to want to have a word with you." "Your father?" Brenda's laughter was a harsh, grating sound. "And who is your father? The President of the United States?" "No," Ayana said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout. "He's the man who just bought this airline. He's your new boss." The laughter died in Brenda's throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty grayish pallor. Her eyes, which had been so full of malice and contempt, were now wide with a dawning, sickening horror. She stared at Ayana, at the confident set of her jaw, the unwavering conviction in her eyes, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the girl was telling the truth. The crowd, which had been buzzing with indignation, fell silent once more. The only sound was the frantic beeping of the boarding pass scanner, a sound that now seemed to mock Brenda's, a single terrible thought. What have I done? Just then a man in a sharply tailored suit pushed his way through the crowd. He was a man who radiated an aura of authority, his face a mask of controlled urgency. He was followed by 2 uniformed security guards. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes scanning the scene. "I was told there was a disturbance." Brenda, her voice trembling, pointed a shaky finger at Ayana. "This girl, she was causing a scene. Her ticket, it was fraudulent." The man's gaze fell on Ayana, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. He had seen her picture on the news, standing next to her father. He was the airport's general manager, a man who made it his business to know who was who. He turned to Brenda, his voice as cold as a winter's night. "Brenda, are you telling me you ripped up the boarding pass of Ayana Caldwell?" Brenda's face crumpled. The last vestiges of her defiance crumbled into dust. I didn't know who she was." "That's irrelevant," the manager said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You are a representative of this airline, and your behavior has been a disgrace. You are suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." Brenda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But no words came out. The security guards moved in their presence, a silent, unyielding finality. As they led her away, her face a mask of disbelief and despair, she caught one last glimpse of Ayana. The girl was standing tall, her head held high, her camera now pointed directly at Brenda, capturing the moment of her downfall for the world to see. The crowd, which had been a sea of angry faces, now parted to let Ayana through. A few people offered her words of support, of apology, of admiration. The business executive in the pantsuit gave her a respectful nod. The young man with the camera gave her a thumbs up. As she walked towards the jet bridge, a new announcement echoed through the terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. The new owner of Transatlantic Air, Mr. Robert Caldwell, is on his way to the gate to personally apologize to his daughter and to all the passengers for the unacceptable behavior of one of our employees." Ayana paused, a small smile playing on her lips. She had a feeling this was going to be a flight to remember, and she had the pictures to prove it. The jet bridge felt like a victory tunnel. As Ayana stepped onto the plane, the first-class cabin with its plush leather seats and spacious layout seemed to welcome her with a silent embrace. The flight attendants, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension, greeted her with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. "Miss Caldwell," the purser, a woman with a warm, genuine smile, said, "Welcome aboard. We are so incredibly sorry for what you just experienced. It was inexcusable." "Thank you," Ayana said, her voice gracious. "I appreciate that." She settled into her seat, the soft leather a welcome comfort after the emotional turmoil of the past hour. As she looked out the window, she saw a black car pull up onto the tarmac. A man in a familiar, well-tailored suit stepped out. Her father. A few minutes later, Robert Caldwell boarded the plane, his presence filling the cabin with a quiet authority. He walked straight to Ayana's seat, his face a mixture of concern and relief. "Are you okay, sweetie?" he asked, his voice low and full of love. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Just a little shaken up." He hugged her tightly, his arms a protective shield around her. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This never should have happened. No one should ever be treated like that, especially not my daughter." He pulled back his eyes, scanning her face, searching for any lingering traces of hurt. "I was going to tell you about the airline when you landed in London," he said, a wry smile touching his lips. "I guess the cat's out of the bag." Ayana laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh that seemed to release all the tension that had been coiled inside her. "Yeah, I'd say so. So you're the new king of transatlantic air," he chuckled. "Something like that. And my first act as king is to make sure that what happened to you today never happens to anyone ever again." He turned to the purser, his voice now firm and businesslike. "Please inform the captain that we will be delayed a little longer. I want to address the other passengers." The purser nodded, her eyes wide with respect. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell." Robert Caldwell walked to the front of the cabin, his voice resonating through the plane's PA system. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Caldwell, and I am the new owner of this airline. I want to personally apologize to each and every one of you for the delay and for the unacceptable behavior you witnessed at the gate today." He paused, letting his words sink in. "What happened to my daughter was not just a case of a rude employee. It was a symptom of a much deeper problem, a problem of prejudice and discrimination that has no place in our society, and certainly no place in this company. I give you my personal guarantee that we will be conducting a full and thorough investigation into this incident, and that we will be implementing new policies and training programs to ensure that every passenger, regardless of their race, religion, or background, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." He looked directly at Ayana, his eyes full of pride. "My daughter," he said, his voice softening, "is a strong, intelligent, and compassionate young woman. She stood up for herself today, and in doing so, she stood up for all of us. I am incredibly proud of her." A round of applause erupted throughout the plane, a spontaneous and heartfelt tribute to a father's love and a daughter's courage. Ayana's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. In that moment, she felt a love so powerful, so unconditional, that it washed away all the ugliness of the past hour. As her father returned to his seat beside her, Ayana's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert: gate agent fired after racist tirade against billionaire's daughter. #Justice for Ayana trends on Twitter. She opened the link and saw a photo of herself taken by the young man with the camera phone. She looked fierce, defiant, and unapologetic, and she knew with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul that this was just the beginning. Meanwhile, in a sterile, windowless room in the airport's administrative building, Brenda was being debriefed by a team of human resources representatives and airline executives. The defiance had drained out of her, replaced by a desperate, pleading fear. "I didn't know who she was." She repeated, her voice a broken mantra. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but please don't fire me. I have a family. I have a mortgage. I can't lose my job." The head of HR, a woman with a stern but not unkind face, looked at her with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Brenda, this isn't just about who her father is. This is about your behavior. We have received numerous complaints about you in the past. Your file is full of them. We have given you warnings, we have sent you to sensitivity training. But nothing has changed." She slid a file across the table. It was thick with letters of complaint, each one a testament to Brenda's long history of rudeness, condescension, and prejudice. "You have been a liability to this company for a long time, Brenda, and today you became a full-blown crisis." Brenda stared at the file, her mind reeling. She had always dismissed the complaints as the ramblings of overly sensitive passengers. She had never taken them seriously. She had never believed there would be any real consequences. But now, as she looked at the faces of the executives around the table, she saw no sympathy, no second chances. She saw only the cold, hard reality of her situation. She had not just ripped up a ticket. She had ripped up her own life. "Your employment with Transatlantic Air is terminated effective immediately," the head of HR said, her voice firm and final. "You will be escorted from the premises. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." Brenda didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring into the abyss of her own making. The security guards who had escorted her from the gate were now back, their presence, a silent, looming shadow. As they led her out of the room, she felt a profound and terrifying sense of emptiness. She had lost everything, and she had no one to blame but herself. As she walked through the airport, a pariah in the place that had been her kingdom for so long, she could feel the eyes of her former colleagues on her. They looked at her, not with sympathy, but with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you let your prejudices get the better of you. She stepped out into the harsh sunlight, the world suddenly feeling alien and hostile. Her phone buzzed a relentless stream of notifications from social media. Her name was trending, her face plastered all over the internet, accompanied by hashtags like #BrendaTheBigot and #KarmaIsaby. She had become a villain in a story that had gone viral, a story that would follow her for the rest of her life. And as she stood there, alone and adrift in a sea of public condemnation, she finally understood the true weight of her actions. She had not just lost a job. She had lost her reputation, her dignity, her future. And it was a price she would be paying for a very, very long time. The story of Ayanna Caldwell and Brenda the gate agent was more than just a fleeting viral moment. It was a cultural flashpoint. It ignited a national conversation about race privilege and corporate responsibility. The video of Brenda's tirade, captured by the quick-thinking young man at the gate, was viewed millions of times, shared across every social media platform, and replayed on a loop on every major news network. Ayanna, who had once been a relatively anonymous teenager with a passion for photography, was now a household name. She was hailed as a hero, a symbol of grace under pressure, a role model for young people everywhere. She was inundated with interview requests from local news channels to national talk shows, but she turned them all down. She didn't want to be a celebrity. She wanted to be a catalyst for change. With her father's guidance, she issued a single, powerful statement. "What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a systemic problem that permeates our society. I am grateful for the support I have received, but I ask that we focus not on me, but on the larger issue of racial bias and discrimination. Let us use this moment to have a real conversation about how we can create a more just and equitable world for everyone. Let us turn this ugly incident into an opportunity for positive change. The statement was a masterstroke of public relations, but it was also a genuine reflection of Ayana's character. She was not interested in revenge. She was interested in justice, and she knew that true justice was not just about punishing one person. It was about changing the system that had created her. Her father, Robert Caldwell, was equally committed to this goal. He was not just a businessman. He was a man with a conscience. And he was determined to use his newfound power to make a real difference. He immediately launched a full-scale independent investigation into Transatlantic Air's policies and practices. He hired a team of top lawyers and diversity and inclusion experts to conduct a thorough review of the company's hiring practices, training programs, and complaint procedures. He made it clear that no one was safe, that no stone would be left unturned. The investigation sent a shockwave through the airline's corporate headquarters. Executives who had long turned a blind eye to the company's toxic culture were now scrambling to cover their tracks. But it was too late. The tide had turned. The investigation quickly uncovered a pattern of systemic discrimination that was far more pervasive than anyone had imagined. There were hundreds of complaints, similar to Ayana's complaints, that had been ignored, dismissed, or buried in a mountain of bureaucratic red tape. There were stories of passengers being racially profiled, of employees being subjected to racist and sexist jokes, of a corporate culture that not only tolerated but actively encouraged a climate of intolerance. As the details of the investigation began to leak to the press, the public outcry grew even louder. Protesters gathered outside Transatlantic Air's headquarters, demanding justice and accountability. The company's stock price plummeted. Advertisers began to pull their contracts. The airline was facing a full-blown crisis, a crisis that threatened to destroy its reputation and its bottom line. Robert Caldwell, however, remained steadfast. He knew that this was not just about saving his company. It was about saving its soul. He held a press conference, his face a mask of grim determination. "The findings of our investigation are deeply disturbing," he said, his voice resonating with a mixture of anger and shame. "They reveal a corporate culture that is rotten to the core, a culture that has allowed prejudice and discrimination to fester for far too long, a culture that has failed our employees and our customers." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the sea of reporters. "I am here today to say that this ends now. We are going to tear down this toxic culture and build a new one from the ground up. A culture that is based on the principles of diversity, inclusion, and respect. A culture that reflects the values of our customers and our country." He then announced a series of sweeping reforms. He fired the entire senior management team, replacing them with a new, more diverse group of leaders. He implemented a new zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. He created a new independent office of diversity and inclusion with the power to investigate any complaint and to recommend disciplinary action. He pledged to donate millions of dollars to organizations that were working to combat racial injustice. It was a bold and audacious plan, a plan that was met with a mixture of skepticism and hope. Some critics dismissed it as a cynical PR stunt, a desperate attempt to salvage the company's image. But others saw it as a genuine commitment to change a sign that perhaps, just perhaps this time, would be different. Meanwhile, Brenda was living in a self-made prison of shame and regret. Her name had become synonymous with bigotry. She was a pariah in her own community. Her friends had abandoned her. Her family was ashamed of her. She couldn't go to the grocery store without being recognized, without being subjected to the glares and whispers of strangers. She had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the world, a lightning rod for all the anger and frustration that had been simmering just beneath the surface of society. And she was drowning in it. She tried to apologize, to explain, to rationalize her behavior. But no one was listening. She had become a caricature, a two-dimensional villain in a story that was much bigger than her. One day, a journalist named Sarah, a young, ambitious reporter for a new online publication, decided to dig deeper into Brenda's story. She wasn't interested in the easy narrative of the racist gate agent. She was interested in the more complex story of the woman behind the headlines. She found Brenda living in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city. She was a shell of her former self, her face etched with a deep and abiding sadness. She was hesitant to talk at first, but Sarah was persistent. She was not there to judge. She was there to listen. And so Brenda began to talk. She talked about her childhood, about her struggles, about a series of resentments and prejudices that had festered inside her for years. It was not an excuse for her behavior, but it was a story, a human story, a story that was far more complicated than the one that had been told on the news. As Sarah listened, she began to realize that Brenda was not just a villain. She was also a victim of her own ignorance, her own fear, her own a broken system that had failed her in more ways than one. And as she delved deeper into the story of transatlantic air, she began to uncover a web of corruption and complicity that went all the way to the top. She found evidence of a cover-up, of a deliberate attempt to silence the victims of discrimination and to protect the company's image at all costs. She had stumbled upon a story that was far bigger than she had ever imagined, a story that had the power to expose the dark underbelly of corporate America and to hold the powerful accountable for their actions. And she knew with a certainty that thrilled and terrified her that this was the story that was going to make her career. The story of how one girl's courage and one man's conscience had brought an entire empire to its knees, and how in the process they had sparked a revolution. Sarah's investigation into transatlantic air was a masterclass in journalistic tenacity. She worked tirelessly, chasing down leads, interviewing former employees, and poring over years of internal documents. She was a bloodhound on the scent of a story, and she would not be deterred. Her breakthrough came when she tracked down a former HR manager who had been fired for trying to blow the whistle on the company's discriminatory practices. He was a man with a conscience, a man who had been silenced and discredited, but who had never given up hope that one day the truth would come out. He gave Sarah a treasure trove of evidence, emails, memos, internal reports, all of which painted a damning picture of a corporate culture that was not just toxic, but criminal. There was evidence of a shadow HR department, a secret group of executives who were responsible for handling sensitive complaints, which was a euphemism for making them disappear. There were emails from senior executives joking about racist and sexist incidents. There was a memo from the former CEO, a man named Richard Branson, who had personally ordered the shredding of documents related to a discrimination lawsuit. It was a smoking gun, a bombshell that would blow the lid off the entire scandal. Sarah knew that she had to be careful. The people she was up against were powerful and ruthless. They would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. She worked in secret, sharing her findings only with her editor and a trusted team of lawyers. They knew that they had to build an airtight case, one that could withstand the inevitable legal challenges that would come their way. Meanwhile, Ayana was in London, trying to immerse herself in her studies, to escape the media frenzy that had engulfed her life. But the story of what had happened to her was never far away. It was on the news, in the papers, on the lips of everyone she met. She had become an reluctant icon, a symbol of a movement that she had never intended to start, and she was struggling to come to grips with her newfound fame. She was just a girl who loved photography, a girl who wanted to see the world. She had never asked for any of this. One day she received a call from her father. He sounded excited, energized, like a man who had just won a great victory. "We got them, sweetie," he said, his voice buzzing with triumph. "We got them all." He told her about Sarah's investigation, about the evidence she had uncovered, about the impending legal and criminal charges against the former executives of Transatlantic Air. He told her that Richard Branson had been arrested, that he was facing charges of obstruction of justice and perjury. "This is bigger than just Brenda," he said, his voice full of a righteous fury. "This is about a whole system of corruption and complicity, and we're going to tear it all down." Ayana felt a surge of pride, of gratitude, of awe for her father. He was not just a billionaire. He was a warrior for justice, and he was fighting this battle for her, for all the people who had been wronged by this company, for all the people who had been silenced and ignored. A few days later, Sarah's story broke. It was a journalistic tour de force, a meticulously researched, powerfully written exposé that laid bare the dark heart of Transatlantic Air. The story was published simultaneously in dozens of newspapers and websites around the world. It was the lead story on every news channel. It was the talk of the town, the talk of the world. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The company's stock price went into a free fall. The board of directors resigned en masse. The airline was on the brink of collapse. But Robert Caldwell was not about to let his company die. He saw this as an opportunity, a chance to rebuild from the ashes, to create a new kind of airline, one that was truly worthy of its name. He held another press conference, this time not to apologize, but to announce a bold and visionary plan for the future. "Transatlantic Air is not just a company," he said, his voice ringing with passion and conviction. "It is a symbol of a shared humanity, of our interconnectedness, of our desire to explore the world and to connect with one another. And we are not going to let that symbol be tarnished by the actions of a few corrupt and prejudiced individuals." He announced that he was rebranding the airline, changing its name to Caldwell Air. He unveiled a new logo, a new livery, a new vision for the future. He pledged to make Caldwell Air the most diverse and inclusive airline in the world, a company that would be a model for corporate responsibility and social justice. He also announced the creation of the Ayana Caldwell Foundation, a non-profit organization that would be dedicated to supporting young artists and journalists from underrepresented communities. The foundation would be funded with a portion of the airline's profits, and it would be run by Ayana herself. It was a bold and audacious move, a move that was met with a wave of public support and admiration. Robert Caldwell was no longer just a businessman. He was a visionary, a philanthropist, a leader who was using his wealth and power to make the world a better place. And Ayana, who had once been a victim, was now a leader in her own right. She had found her voice, her purpose, her passion. She was no longer just a girl with a camera. She was a force for change. As she stood on the stage next to her father, bathed in the warm glow of the television lights, she felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. She knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was not afraid. She was ready to take on the world. And she knew that with her father by her side, anything was possible. Karma is rarely a lightning bolt from a clear sky. More often it is a slow, grinding erosion, the steady drip of consequence that wears down stone. For Brenda, it was a deluge. The infamy was instant and suffocating. Being fired was the first stone to fall, but it triggered an avalanche. For 20 years, her identity had been fused with her uniform, her authority derived from the logo on her badge. She was Brenda from the airline. Now, stripped of that, she was just Brenda the bigot, a hashtag made flesh. Her search for a new job became a series of quiet humiliations. She'd sit in sterile waiting rooms, her resume clutched in sweaty palms. The interviews would start promisingly enough. She was experienced, articulate. But then would come the inevitable Google search, the flicker of recognition in the interviewer's eyes, the polite but firm, "We'll be in touch." They never were. The brand of her shame was indelible. Her savings, once a source of pride, dwindled with terrifying speed. The eviction notice taped to her door felt less like a legal document and more like a final judgment. Packing up her life into cardboard boxes, the meager possessions that defined her existence, she felt a hollowness she'd never known. Each object was a memory of a life that was now over. That first night at the city shelter, lying on a thin mattress in a room filled with the quiet desperation of strangers, was the nadir. The smell of disinfectant and despair was a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. It was in the suffocating silence of those nights that the real reckoning began. Stripped of all external validation, she was forced to turn inward. The face of Ayanna Caldwell, proud and defiant, haunted her. She saw the tremble in the elderly man's hands. She heard the crushed disappointment in the honeymooning couple's voices. These were no longer faceless passengers. They were ghosts she had created, and they populated her lonely world. It was not a sudden epiphany, but a slow, agonizing dawn. The prejudice she had harbored, a bitter seed planted in a lifetime of small resentments and perceived slights, had borne the sourest of fruits. The blame which she had so desperately tried to cast outward finally boomeranged back, settling deep and heavy in her soul. It was in this state of raw despair that Sarah the journalist found her. Sarah's initial story had made her career, but a nagging sense of incompletion remained. The world had its villain, but Sarah knew life was never that simple. She found Brenda ladling soup in the shelter's kitchen, her movements mechanical, her eyes vacant. Brenda Sarah's voice was gentle, cautious. Brenda didn't look up. "Come to see how the other half lives. Get your follow-up on the pathetic racist." The words were acid, but they lacked any real heat. "I came to listen," Sarah replied, pulling up a stool. "If you're willing to talk." Something in Sarah's tone, not pity but genuine curiosity, broke through the wall of Brenda's shame. And so she talked. The words came out in a torrent, a confession whispered into the clatter of the soup kitchen. It was not an excuse, but an excavation of a life's worth of bitterness. It was the story of a woman who felt invisible and had tried to make others feel even smaller. Sarah's subsequent article, "The Redemption of Brenda," was not a defense, but a nuanced portrait of a woman grappling with the wreckage of her life. It was a cautionary tale about the slow poison of prejudice and the difficult, unglamorous work of atonement. It didn't go viral, but it sparked a different kind of conversation in quieter corners of the internet. A conversation about empathy and the possibility of change. For Brenda, reading the comments, some still hateful but others surprisingly compassionate, was the first glimmer of light in a long, dark tunnel. She began volunteering at the shelter in earnest, finding a new, fragile purpose in serving those who were as broken as she was. It wasn't happiness, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Ayana's life was a universe away, yet she was on her own journey of reconciliation. Caldwell Air, reborn from the ashes of Transatlantic, was a global success, a testament to her father's vision of a corporation with a conscience. The Ayana Caldwell Foundation thrived under her leadership, becoming a vital force for a new generation of creatives who, like her, saw the world through a unique lens. She never forgot the incident. It was a scar on her memory, a faint ache that would return at unexpected moments. But it had also become a crucible, forging her into the woman she was becoming. One evening in her London flat, reviewing applications for the Foundation's new grant, The Unseen Perspectives, she came across Sarah's article about Brenda. She read it once, then twice, the words settling in her heart. She saw not a monster, but a woman lost and broken. The decision was not impulsive. It was the culmination of her own growth. She had spent the last year championing the idea that every story deserves to be told, that empathy is the bridge between worlds. How could she preach that and not practice it? She picked up her phone. Sarah. She typed her fingers steady. I think it's time for me to meet Brenda. I think it's time for us to talk. They met in a quiet, neutral cafe, a place of no history for either of them. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Brenda, thinner and greyer, couldn't meet Ayana's eyes. Ayana, now a poised young woman, exuded a quiet strength that was more intimidating than any anger. Thank you for coming, Ayana said, her voice even. I didn't think you'd want to see me. Brenda whispered, her gaze fixed on the scarred tabletop. I didn't for a long time, Ayana admitted. You hurt me. You humiliated me. You tried to make me feel small, like I didn't belong. Each word was a simple, unadorned truth. I need you to know that. Tears welled in Brenda's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. I know, she choked out. There is no excuse for what I did. It was ugly, and it came from an ugly place inside me. I am so sorry. Not because of who your father is or because I lost my job. I'm sorry because I was cruel to you, to a child, and I have to live with that every day. It was the apology Ayana hadn't known she needed to hear. Not an excuse, but a full-throated admission of her own ugliness. A long silence stretched between them. Ayana took a slow breath. I've been working on a project, Ayana said softly. About forgiveness. About how it's not for the other person, but for yourself. How it's about letting go of the weight. She looked at Brenda, really looked at her, and saw the crushing weight the woman was carrying. I don't know if I can ever forget what you did, but I think I'm ready to forgive you. They would never be friends. The chasm between their experiences was too vast. But in that small cafe, over cold cups of coffee, they found a sliver of common ground. They were two women forever linked by a single moment of hate who had each in their own way chosen a path toward a different kind of grace. It was a fragile peace, a quiet resolution in a story that had begun with a furious public roar. It was the story of injustice and redemption, of hatred and forgiveness, and of the enduring, complicated power of the human spirit to rise from the ashes and find a new way to fly. The story of Ayana Caldwell and Brenda is a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences, that our words have weight, and that our prejudices can have a devastating impact on the lives of others. It's a story of how one young woman's courage and one father's love transformed a moment of ugly discrimination into a global movement for change. But it's also a story of hope, a story that shows us that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to change. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it inspired you to be a little kinder, a little more compassionate, then please hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will make you believe in the power of karma and the resilience of the human spirit.